In that case, if she did bear children later on, they would be more apt to carry a defective heredity, producing an undue number of monsters and freaks in future generations, and so contaminating the race. Of course she understood it. She could hardly remember the time when she didn't. Years ago? Centuries? There wasn't much difference in a place where time was endless. His lecture finished, her husband smiled and grew almost cheerful. "Now that you're going to have a child, that's all in the background again. Do you know, Effie, that when I first came in, I had some very good news for you. I'm to become a member of the junior committee, and the announcement will be made at the banquet tonight." He cut short her mumbled congratulations. "So brighten yourself up and put on your best dress. I want the other juniors to see what a handsome wife the new member has got." He paused. "Well, get a move on." She spoke with difficulty, still not looking at him. "I'm terribly sorry, Hank, but you'll have to go alone. I'm not well." He straightened up with an indignant jerk. "There you go again. First that infantile, inexcusable business of the shutters, and now this. No feeling for my reputation at all. Don't be ridiculous, Effie. You're coming." "Terribly sorry," she repeated blindly. "But I really can't. I'd just be sick. I wouldn't make you proud of me at all." "Of course you won't," he retorted sharply. "As it is, I have to spend half my energy running around making excuses for you. Why you're so odd, why you always seem to be ailing, why you're always stupid and snobbish and say the wrong thing. But tonight's really important, Effie. It will cause a lot of bad comment if the new member's wife isn't present. You know how just a hint of sickness starts the old radiation disease rumor going. You've got to come, Effie." She shook her head helplessly. "Oh, for heaven's sake, come on!" he shouted, advancing on her. "This is just a silly mood. As soon as you get going, you'll snap out of it. There's nothing really wrong with you at all." He put his hand on her shoulder to turn her around, and at his touch, her face suddenly grew so desperate and gray that for a moment he was alarmed in spite of himself. "Really?" he asked, almost with a note of concern. She nodded miserably. He stepped back and strode about irresolutely. "Well, of course, if that's the way it is." He checked himself and a sad smile crossed his face. "So you don't care enough about your old husband's success to make one supreme effort in spite of feeling bad?" Again the helpless headshake. "I just can't go out tonight under any circumstances." And her gaze stole toward the lead shutters. He was about to say something when he caught the direction of her gaze. His eyebrows jumped. For seconds he stared at her incredulously, as if some completely new and almost unbelievable possibility had popped into his mind. The look of incredulity slowly faded, to be replaced by a harder, more calculating expression. But when he spoke again, his voice was shockingly bright and kind. "Well, it can't be helped naturally, and I certainly wouldn't want you to go if you weren't able to enjoy it, so you hop right into bed and get a good rest. I'll run over to the men's dorm to freshen up. No, really, I don't want you to have to make any effort at all. Incidentally, Jim Barnes isn't going to be able to come to the banquet either. Touch of the old flu, he tells me, of all things." He watched her closely as he mentioned the other man's name, but she didn't react noticeably. In fact, she hardly seemed to be hearing his chatter. "I got a bit sharp with you, I'm afraid, Effie," he continued contritely. "I'm sorry about that. I was excited about my new job, and I guess that was why things upset me. Made me feel let down when I found you weren't feeling as good as I was. Selfish of me. Now, you get into bed right away and get well. Don't worry about me a bit. I know you'd come if you possibly could, and I know you'll be thinking about me. Well, I must be off now." He started toward her as if to embrace her, then seemed to think better of it. He turned back at the doorway and said, emphasizing the words, "You'll be completely alone for the next 4 hours." He waited for her nod, then bounced out. She stood still until his footsteps died away. Then she straightened up, walked over to where he'd put down the wristwatch, picked it up and smashed it hard on the floor. The crystal shattered, the case flew apart, and something went zing! She stood there, breathing heavily. Slowly, her sagged features lifted, formed themselves into the beginning of a smile. She stole another look at the shutters. The smile became more definite. She felt her hair, wet her fingers, and ran them along her hairline and back over her ears. After wiping her hands on her apron, she took it off. She straightened her dress, lifted her head with a little flourish, and stepped smartly toward the window. Then her face went miserable again, and her steps slowed. No, it couldn't be. And it won't be, she told herself. It had been just an illusion, a silly romantic dream that she had somehow projected out of her beauty-starved mind and given a moment's false reality. There couldn't be anything alive outside. There hadn't been for 2 whole years. And if there conceivably were, it would be something altogether horrible. She remembered some of the pariahs, hairless, witless creatures, with radiation welts crawling over their bodies like worms, who had come begging for succor during the last months of the terror and been shot down. How they must have hated the people in refuges. But even as she was thinking these things, her fingers were caressing the bolts, gingerly drawing them, and she was opening the shutters, gently, apprehensively. No, there couldn't be anything outside, she assured herself wryly, peering out into the green night. Even her fears had been groundless. But the face came floating up toward the window. She started back in terror, then checked herself. For the face wasn't horrible at all, only very thin, with full lips and large eyes, and a thin, proud nose like the jutting beak of a bird. And no radiation welts or scars marred the skin, olive in the tempered moonlight. It looked, in fact, just as it had when she had seen it the first time. For a long moment, the face stared deep, deep into her brain. Then the full lips smiled, and a half-clenched, thin-fingered hand materialized itself from the green darkness and rapped twice on the grimy pane. Her heart pounding, she furiously worked the little crank that opened the window. It came unstuck from the frame with a tiny explosion of dust and a zing like that of the watch, only louder. A moment later, it swung open wide, and a puff of incredibly fresh air caressed her face and the inside of her nostrils, stinging her eyes with unanticipated tears. The man outside balanced on the sill, crouching like a fawn, head high, one elbow on knee. He was dressed in scarred, snug trousers and an old sweater. "Is it tears I get for a welcome?" he mocked her gently in a musical voice. "Or are those only to greet God's own breath, the air?" He swung down inside, and now she could see he was tall. Turning, he snapped his fingers and called, "Kom, puss." A black cat with a twisted stump of a tail and feet like small boxing gloves and ears almost as big as rabbits hopped clumsily in view. He lifted it down, gave it a pat, then, nodding familiarly to Effie, he unstrapped a little pack from his back and laid it on the table. She couldn't move. She even found it hard to breathe. The window," she finally managed to get out. He looked at her inquiringly, caught the direction of her stabbing finger. Moving without haste, he went over and closed it carelessly. "The shutters, too," she told him, but he ignored that, looking around. "It's a snug enough place you and your man have," he commented. "Or is it that this is a free love town, or a harem spot, or just a military post?" He checked her before she could answer. "But let's not be talking about such things now. Soon enough I'll be scared to death for both of us. Best enjoy the kick of meeting, which is always good for 20 minutes at the least." He smiled at her rather shyly. "Have you food? Good, then bring it." She set cold meat and some precious canned bread before him, and had water heating for coffee. Before he fell to, he shredded a chunk of meat and put it on the floor for the cat, which left off its sniffing inspection of the walls and ran up eagerly, mewing. Then the man began to eat, chewing each mouthful slowly and appreciatively. From across the table, Effie watched him, drinking in his every deft movement, his every cryptic quirk of expression. She attended to making the coffee, but that took only a moment. Finally, she could contain herself no longer. "What's it like up there?" she asked breathlessly. "Outside, I mean." He looked at her oddly for quite a space. Finally, he said flatly, "Oh, it's a wonderland for sure. More amazing than you tombed folk could ever imagine. A veritable fairyland." And he quickly went on eating. "No, but really," she pressed. Noting her eagerness, he smiled and his eyes filled with playful tenderness. "I mean it, on my oath," he assured her. You think the bombs and the dust made only death and ugliness.